How to borrow more? That's the biggest question we all have as property investors. We get to a point, we have 1, 2, 3 properties, and they kind of get stuck. We have this glass ceiling on funds that exists out there. For anyone that has been a property investor for a while, they will know exactly what I'm talking about. And the question is, how do we borrow more? How do we go beyond to be able to lend more? Because the rate of which we are paying our interest is lower than the rate of which our properties are growing. So we are better served to have more investment properties, to have more debt. But the problem is some banks, and this is where it gets a little bit spicy, this is what we talk about in the session, is some banks are not the best for borrowing when you start out, and some banks are better when you're further down the investment journey. Hey everyone, my name is Joe Tucker, and together with Jeff Miles, we created Oz Property Investors, Australia's largest property investment community with over 79,000 members now, which is pretty cool. Each week, we interview top property experts. Tonight is no different. We have Aaron Wybrow of Strategic Mortgage Brokers, and he's an absolute legend in the lending space. Now, this session is, I think it's foundational for anyone that's starting out property investing to get a full holistic understanding of how the lending landscape works, and anyone that's further along in their journey, some of the tips and tricks that they can use to be able to borrow more and borrow more and borrow more. Obviously you need to do it safe and securely, but that's exactly what this session is. We talk about self-managed super funds, we talk about trust lending, we talk about how to structure the debt, how to pay down debt. Should we be paying off our PPOR? Should we be doing this whole debt recycling thing? What the hell is that all about? It's action-packed. There's so much stuff in here. Let's jump into the session and make it happen. I have $1 million of borrowing capacity. How should I think about that? Because when I hear that I have $1 million, oh great, I need to buy 2 500s and that's it. Like, how do you think about it from a flexibility standpoint? Because it's not like this purchase isn't going to be 500 and the next purchase isn't going to be 500. You could probably borrow more. Is there like a percentage that you think about it for? Like, actually right now you can borrow $1 million, but if you went with a different lender, you could borrow 1.3.
So that's where staging, when we understand the goal. So we understand the goal: 150 grand passive income, $1 million worth of borrowing capacity. Now, how do I start? Well, we're probably going to start in sequence. So we're not going to buy 2 at once. You can, if you want, and spend some time on it and be badgered with 2 financial cooling off periods and a bucket load of documents, and you may have to take a day off work to get the documents in the right spot because banks are a little crazy when you do it this way. But you might buy one property. I've seen it before where you do the valuation on the property. It may be untenanted, but it needs a paint job or whatever it is to be able to increase the rent. So you might buy a property and it's got $450 a week in rent. So we have to approve the loan with the $450 because the bank takes the lower of the rent. We get it approved. We get the $500,000 property done. You do a little bit of a paint job, whatever you need to do. Now you can get $550 worth of rent per week after settlement. So immediately your borrowing capacity numbers are changed upwards pretty quickly to be able to readjust the numbers. So where the work of an investment broker comes in is at settlement. Like, what's your next goal? Are we going for the next one? Is there any changes to the rental income that we can see? Are you able to achieve the rental incomes that were chatted about with the buyer's agent and everyone beforehand? When is it going to kick in? Okay, cool. We're going to go borrowing capacity changes to this. Then we can go to the next one and use a bit more of that $1 million borrowing capacity to get the next one. And maybe the next one's like the same thing, a little bit less on the rent, a bit more after settlement because of the lease change, whatever. And that's the compounding effect. So you could, if you got enough income and enough borrowing capacity, say past the 1 million or up to the 2 million, and you only want to start with the million and go for 2 at once, absolutely go for whatever you want. Go for $1 million property if you like. And there's no wrong or right here. It's getting the right advice and the right due diligence on the property. But you can, if you're starting out, do one and then get your borrowing capacity reshaped. And for anything that you've got valuation uplift in property, Joe, you've got valuation uplift in property already, and potentially rental value uplift as well. So that changes your borrowing capacity, right? This is just a model to show you what it can happen. So if we went from a 20 grand credit card down to a 10, we can increase our borrowing capacity by 60 grand. If we went from a 20 to a 5, it's a 90 grand increase in borrowing capacity for our gentleman here. So what it is that the bank doesn't care if you pay off your credit card every month. They don't care. They want to know what limit you have available that can turn into curtains and nights out on the town and all that other stuff. They want to know the limit. So the limit is what they take into account. Most banks will take 38% of the limit or 3.8% a month. Some will take 42% of the limit or 4.2% a month on their calculator of the limit. So it may not need to reduce it to nothing, but it does have an impact. And if we've talked about like the change of debt into deductible debt. Now we reduce the credit card. Now we've gone from 119,000 increase in borrowing capacity, and we're approaching the $200,000 increase in borrowing capacity, right? So we're compounding the effect here.
That's super interesting. Like 20 grand on a credit card. I only have $1,000 on it. I pay it back every month. It doesn't matter. It's your 20 grand that's the most important. Mm-hmm. But it's also it looks like it's 4 to 5 times the difference. So like a 22 grand credit card would be almost 100 grand in servicing that you've just all of a sudden gotten back.
Yeah. So if we take the examples, we've got owner-occupied debt to investor debt. Now we've reduced our credit card. Look what we've done to our borrowing. We can go further. What's the car loan and personal loans, right?
Yeah.
Here we go. Car finance. So I have to put it in car finance because some people think their car lease is not a loan. It's actually a loan and it impacts your borrowing capacity. So car finance of 60 grand. If you get rid of that, 98 grand up. So now we've gone from 110 to changing debts around. We've got our credit card at 60 grand, and now we've got 98 grand by dealing with the car finance. We've got 74 grand by dealing with the personal loan finance. All right. And there's a couple of ways that you can deal with this. You don't you're just going to whip 60 grand out of your back pocket and throw it off the car loan, right? But if you've got a genuine intention to need to go down the line, you're going down the line in property investing, and you've got some equity, like you've got 60 grand equity that we can consolidate the car or consolidate the personal loan to help open up the borrowing capacity. It doesn't mean that you have to pay the car out over 30 years and be worth a paperclip at the end of the 30-year term, but it means that you can get the next property and have the uplift, but you can still pay it off in 3 or 5 or 7 years, depending on how you want to do it. Or you can just get rid of it, and it's up to you. So business debt, go for it.
That personal loan there, $30,000. So what you're saying is, if I didn't have it there, I'd get an extra 74 grand of borrowing ability. But if I went to you and I'm like, great, I've got equity, I just can't access any serviceability. Why don't I get equity out, pay down that loan with my $30,000, and then that's going to open up. Yes, I'm going to have that $30,000 worth of debt. So how much of a problem, so this is personal debt versus like credit cards and car finance and personal loan. What about $30,000 of just household investment debt? What is that worth from a borrowing capacity standpoint?
As in, we get $30,000 worth of investment debt, or we're putting the $30,000 personal loan into the owner-occupied mortgage?
I guess it's both. Like, what is an extra 30 grand of investment debt worth, and what is 30 grand worth of owner-occupied debt worth?
That's a tough way to.
I'm just trying to think how. But if we could take the simple approach of going, we've got a $74,000 uplift. So if we take 30 grand of it, we've still got 34 grand left. I'm getting my numbers right. 40 grand left, 44 grand left.
Yeah.
So 44 grand plus the reduction in your credit card, plus the change of owner occupied to investor debt, is still compounding the effect to be able to borrow more money.
Yeah. This is a two-part question. This is one part of it. Does maturing ABN improve rates or simply open up more lenders? Say the business is between 12 and 24 months. Can you just kind of shape that? What if I own a business that's before 12 months? Like, I own a carpentry business, a plumbing business, a marketing business, and I've owned it for 9 months. Can I go out there and buy a property? Like, what's the general consensus against that? And then let's answer this next one, because that's the next time period and phase.
The answer to the question is yes.
You can still lend at 9 months.
Yeah. How? You can lend at 1 day ABN.
6 months, can't you? Yeah.
We have lenders that will lend at 1 day ABN.
I think I might know it. Might
Yeah.
start with
So-
a R and
so-
end in D.
So to expand on this question, does maturing ABNs improve rates or simply open up more lenders? So it opens up more lenders that have better rates. To rephrase it. So 18 months is the sweet point for most major banks to get the lower cost lending.
Yep.
And 1 year of good tax returns. So you've got to be careful. We run on a financial year. So if you if you can magically start on the 1st of July, it makes most common sense to be able to get a full tax year in your in your numbers. But if you start like March of 2025 and you do your 2025 tax return, we've got annualization of only 3 or 4 months of earnings, right? So you've got to be careful with that. Less than 18 months, there are things that we can do, like looking at bank statements, business bank statements, so credits in, debits out. We can look at that to service the loan. We can look at business activity statements to service the loans. For the professions that you've mentioned, they probably do need to wait for the maturity of their ABN to get the lower cost lending, but we can go to BAS lending and accountant verification lending and bank statements lending easily on that stuff. And there are some professions that may convert from a employee to a business owner, and we can lend straight away with major banks. So we've done it where IT professionals come from a 200 grand employment package, and then they go on to a 260 grand contractor back to the same company or wherever they need to. And the bank will use the lower of the two. So if they're earning 250 in their business and they were earning 200 beforehand, they'll probably just use the 200 to service it, and we can still use major banks to do that.
So okay. So it just opens up. So the later the business is,
it opens up.
Yeah. Okay. So what if the profit is unreal? It's not so much about that. It's more about the.
So profit has to be there. Profit's where your loan repayments come from. So the bank's only looking at profit. So
when I was 18, I was looking at Carpenters and Sparkies, and I'm like, why? How have you got the nicest car in the world? Like, how are you doing this? Dude, I just write it all off on tax. I run my business, I write it off on tax. And this is not a go. This is just what I saw. But I'm seeing it time and time again, especially in the trades industry, where it's, oh no, I don't want to pay any tax because I want to write as much stuff off as possible. Why is that the worst thing to do?
Yeah, so it's a bit like cashies. Cashies are good. Cashies is another thing, right?
As well. Yeah.
Because your money that goes in your bank account from other jobs has to pay for the job that you got from the cash job, so your profit decreases over time for the long term. The thing comes in is about the top. Your turnover is only created by you spending money to get it. So the banks will look at your net profit before tax. So I've seen companies that turn over $1 million and spend 900 of it, and they've got $100 grand profit. And then I've looked after companies that turn over $500,000, but they only used 50 grand to get the $500,000. So out of those two, the person that turned over $500,000 has got a huge borrowing capacity compared to the one that turned over $1 million. And when you put all this expense onto your business, it erodes your profit away. Yep. So I'm going to buy the fancy car. Now that's costed me 50 grand on my profit. I'm going to put the subscriptions, the cars, everything onto the business.
Life, right? Like the personal life. I see so many people cross their business life and personal life. I still go out and have client meetings, and I'll pay for the beer myself rather than, because I want my business to be as profitable as possible. Mm-hmm. But what that means is I'm not getting tax. I'm paying a lot of money in tax because the business is so profitable.
So there are businesses you have to get assets. You have to get car finance. You have to get things like trades businesses and things like that. But there are lenders that accommodate those sorts of things. So we've got lenders. If you can show profit on your business and you paid yourself a decent wage, you've got some profit left, and you've got business debts, as long as you've got profit, we can exclude the business debts. So there are lenders out there that can accommodate for large asset and equipment finance and things, because you need that to make the profit.
Well, it's more from a mindset side of things, I think. Where I see people is I need to pay down as much. I need to pay as little tax as possible because that's what's going to allow me to live my best life. But what it does is with that mindset and with that, because you chat with an accountant, that's what they're going to say. No, you want to pay as little as tax as possible. No, you want to pay as much as tax as possible because that means your net profit has more availability, which means that you can then borrow money to go out there and buy property. If your net profit is at 0 or less, it means you're a losing business and the banks are going to look at you and not want to lend you any money. So get that net profit as much as possible. And it sucks because you have to pay the tax on it, but you will be able to compound that into a property, which will then be at a far better rate than any tax that you've paid. So if you have to pay tax, be thankful you're making money. But then there are ways to reduce that debt and do all the tax stuff as well.
Speak to your accountant. Definitely speak to your accountant on that.
We're in a unique period of time for small business owners because we've had about 6 months of trading so far and the profit and loss. So if you are planning to buy property in the tax year 25-26 and you need your 25-24 tax return to do so, you have 5 months to affect your profit now. You have the ability to review your finances. You have ability to, I call it not tax minimization, balance your tax to your borrowing potential. So maybe paying $500 in tax or $5,000 in tax is going to let you get a $1 million property that's going to increase in value. That could be the numbers you need to know. And if you needed to get 10 grand net profit extra between now and the end of the financial year to get your borrowing number, you either need to cut your expenses to get that 5 or 10 grand, or you need to know, if I earn $1,000 on my turnover, how much did it cost me to get that $1,000, and what is that $1,000 going to do to my net profit to be able to affect my borrowing capacity? And I don't know any business owner out there that if you are just off, you're getting your number for borrowing capacity and you want to buy property in 25-26, you need to get your borrowing capacity reviewed today. Because just as we help the employees out with their annualization of their payslip, which the banks accept, what if we were able to get ahead of the curve and look at annualizing your profit and loss to see where you might land at the end of 25, to see what you might need to do now for the next 5 months?
Should you max out personal borrowing capacity before trust SMSF for investments, or is there a time or circumstance where you should consider trust and SMSFs earlier?
Very good.
I reckon we've got to split that. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you can run. So mathematically, you can run out your personal borrowing capacity and still have borrowing capacity in your self-managed super fund because it's an isolated borrowing capacity area. It's also, to make a note on self-managed super funds, there are some calculations of how you can get your borrowing capacity in self-managed super funds, but self-managed super funds aren't called non-NCCP loans. So we are actually able to use future contributions in a few lenders will allow us, if you're ready, willing and able to put salary sacrifice in, they will allow us to put that into the calculator to max your borrowing capacity a lot more. So that's an interesting factor versus the traditional method of looking at history. To run out your borrowing capacity before you get trusts, you're going to get stuck. So to go after a single residential property in a trust to help extend your borrowing capacity, you have to have personal borrowing capacity left to do it, because the trust is typically new in origin, and it requires you as the director and the guarantor of the trust to support the borrowing for the trust. So if you've got anywhere less than $1 million in borrowing capacity but greater than $500,000 left, you probably need to seriously consider thinking about how the borrowing capacity numbers work, because as a broker, we can't tell you go to a trust and do a trust. We can tell you what the impact of your borrowing capacity is before you do it. I have a lot of clients that come and say, oh, my accountant said I should run out my personal borrowing capacity first. That's a wrong move. If you are buying residential assets, you have to have borrowing capacity left before you buy in a trust.
Okay, so let's run the scenario. I just maxed out my borrowing capacity. I'm like, cool, man. I just watched this live session on the internet, and they said I need to get a trust. I'm maxed out personally. I come to you. I've just bought a trust. Let's go buy some property. What are you going to say to me?
No, I'm going to say lease stock's your only option.
Yeah. So
because
typically,
lease stock gets away from your personal capacity.
So what you just said there, more than $1 million, you find less than, so in between 500 and $1 million of borrowing capacity left. So it sounds like it's the second, like it's the second to last property purchase that you need to start considering these trusts.
So what I'm seeing at the moment with the people getting stuck from the people coming to me, an owner occupied and an investment property usually is slowing you down. So you probably got to, like, there's always a benefit of having something in your own name. If you have a highly negative geared property in your own name, it's better than a highly negative geared property in a trust on the mathematical calculation. So
why is that?
Because in a trust, the losses stay in the trust, not able to be taken off your personal income.
Yeah, so you can only deduct it if you have another asset in the trust.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the lenders know that too. So $1 million worth of borrowing capacity in your own name turns into maybe 760 in a trust because they don't allow you to add back the interest to supercharge your borrowing capacity. So
that's the problem if you get into trust too early. So
correct.
First property purchase, I'm like, I heard this whole trust thing. Screw it. I'm just going to start with trust. Jesus, this property investing thing's gets complicated
or costly. So you got to have a plan. So it comes back to the beginning of the session. Have your goal. Like trust the first instance could be a good thing. It's not wrong or right. It's understanding how to manage the thing, having a business plan, having a case that puts it forward. It's like people having a property in each trust. Yeah, that might be really cool for borrowing capacity, but the accountant loves you. If you've got 10 properties, right? That's 20 grand out the window, potentially. So borrowing capacity, it's a way to manage borrowing capacity. And there are a lot of lenders out there that still are allowed to isolate trusts, but they've got to have profit. They've got to have you've got to be thinking, I'm going to put this property in a trust. I'm going to have 90% lend or 100% lend, depending on how you want to do it. And you're going to have it negative. Well, you're not going to be able to exclude it because it still needs you to support it. But over time, that will help you, that will get to a pathway of profitability so that you can include it. And the reason why when it's profitable, so a 5 grand profitable trust with a 10 grand interest cost in the trust's profit and loss is profitable on paper. But as soon as we put the lending onto the banking calculator, the income of the rent drops by 20%. The interest jumps up to 30 grand from 10 grand because they look at the remaining principal and interest terms. So what was 5 grand positive is now 20, 30 grand negative. So the property in a trust, when we can exclude it, can help your borrowing capacity as we look to more in property trust 1 and or trust 2.
So these are some of the scenarios that you kind of map out with folks, right? Like I've got $1 million of borrowing capacity. To be honest, we're going to get you started with an asset that's going to allow you to get, because it's what does this next property need to be to get into the next one? So we'll buy $500,000. You'll then come back to us. We'll be able to borrow $700,000. Maybe this is when we consider the trust. You then need to focus more on maybe a growth / cash flow asset that has some value add potential into the future. That's then going to allow you to do a granny flat or a subdivision or something like that, which then could turn that trust into a cash flow positive asset. That asset that is now in the trust is now completely excluded from the debt situation. You now have $700,000 worth of borrowing capacity because that trust may be able to wash its own face and the lenders will be able to lend you the money that you need to do. So you now all of a sudden are not the person that's jumping on our Facebook group saying, I've totally tapped out. You're not.
That's right. So even if you think you're capped out, you usually only capped out when you bought your property portfolio and now you have half your income. But where you got all your income that you had before when you borrowed for your property portfolio, you usually can find a way to get borrowing capacity back in one way or another. Trusts are great, but you can't run out your borrowing capacity. I can't stress that enough. Don't come when you are run out, even though that we have tools, tips, and tricks that we went through tonight. You still have to have borrowing capacity to buy that single residential asset that you want to buy in a trust without going down the line of lease stock.